Haiti, a country run by armed gangs. Haiti is arguably the single worst place on Earth to live in 2025. Armed gangs now control an estimated 90% of the capital, Port-au-Prince. They control the roads, the ports, the fuel supply, and the routes that humanitarian aid uses to reach people. The gang coalition, known as Vive and Sam, has expanded from the slums into the downtown core and middle-class neighborhoods. They run extortion schemes, set up toll booths on highways, and ambush vehicles carrying food or supplies. Between July 2024 and February 2025, over 4,200 people were killed and more than 1,300 injured, with 92% of casualties caused by gun violence. More than 1.4 million people have been displaced, over 10% of the entire population. Half of all Haitians, roughly 5.5 million people, face acute food insecurity. 2 million have been pushed to emergency hunger levels. Nearly 6,000 people are living in famine-like conditions. The children of Haiti are bearing the worst of it. The United Nations estimates that half of all gang members are now children, with a 700% rise in forced recruitment in early 2025. Over 500,000 children have been displaced. A quarter of them are suffering stunted growth from malnutrition. Only half of health facilities in Port-au-Prince are still operational. 31% have shut down entirely because of gang violence. Gangs control the Artibonite Valley, which is Haiti's main agricultural region. Farmers have been forced off their land by extortion and threats. Food production has collapsed. Food prices have jumped 33% in a single year. The gangs set up toll booths on highways where they charge fees to anyone trying to move goods through their territory. Traders cannot reach markets. Humanitarian organizations cannot deliver aid. The international community authorized a new gang suppression force, but previous missions failed because they were underfunded and outgunned. The entire country is running on less than 25% of the funding it needs to keep people alive. Haiti is not a place that is slowly declining. It is a place that has already collapsed, and the rest of the world is barely paying attention. Yemen, 10 years of war and no end in sight. Yemen has been at war since 2015. After a decade of conflict, the country is now one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet. Over 18 million people, more than half the population, need humanitarian assistance just to survive. 17 million people are food insecure. 5 million are on the brink of famine. 70% of households do not have enough food to meet their daily needs, the highest rate ever recorded in the country. 4.5 million people have been displaced, most of them multiple times. The war has shrunk the economy by more than half. Over 83% of the population lives below the poverty line. The health system is collapsing. More than 450 health facilities have closed. There are only 0.7 doctors per 10,000 inhabitants. Every day, 3 women die during pregnancy or childbirth from complications that could have been prevented with basic care. Children pay the heaviest price. 9.8 million children need humanitarian assistance. The United Nations has called Yemen a living hell for children. On top of the war, climate shocks are making everything worse. Unprecedented flooding in 2024 affected 100,000 families and destroyed what little infrastructure remained. Cholera outbreaks have spread across the country, driven by contaminated water and the collapse of sanitation systems. The Houthi authorities, who control large parts of the country, have detained United Nations staff and humanitarian workers, blocking aid delivery at a time when millions depend on it for survival. 2 million women and girls have lost access to reproductive health services entirely. The 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan for Yemen was only 5% funded as of March. The world is not paying attention, and the people of Yemen are dying because of it. Sudan, a civil war tearing a country apart. Sudan has been engulfed in a civil war since April 2023, when fighting broke out between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. What started as a power struggle between 2 military leaders has turned into a full-scale war that has consumed the entire country. The conflict has displaced 12 million people, making it one of the largest displacement crises in history. The capital, Khartoum, has been devastated. Buildings have been destroyed, infrastructure has collapsed, and civilians have been caught in the crossfire on a massive scale. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. The Rapid Support Forces have been accused of looting, sexual violence, and targeting civilians in areas they control. Famine has been officially confirmed in multiple regions. 25 million people are suffering from severe food insecurity. 4 million children are acutely malnourished, including 770,000 who are at imminent risk of death. Hospitals have closed across the country. Disease outbreaks are spreading. In Darfur, the Rapid Support Forces have carried out massacres against the Masalit people. The United States formally determined in January 2025 that these killings constitute genocide. In October 2025, the city of El Fasher fell to the Rapid Support Forces, giving them control over the last major stronghold in Darfur. Humanitarian aid is almost impossible to deliver. Aid supplies are being looted. The education system has nearly collapsed. Half the population is in urgent need of assistance. Sudan is the world's largest humanitarian crisis right now, and it is getting worse every single month. North Korea, the most controlled place on Earth. North Korea is not failing because of war or natural disaster. It is failing because the government has deliberately chosen to keep its own people in the dark, in poverty, and in fear. The United Nations has described North Korea as having no parallel in the contemporary world when it comes to human rights violations. The regime maintains control through political prison camps where an estimated 200,000 people are held. Prisoners are beaten, starved, and forced into forced labor. The 3 generations rule means that if one person is convicted of a political crime, their children and grandchildren are imprisoned for life. Citizens are required to have framed photographs of the Kim family in their homes and clean them every single day. Propaganda is present in every aspect of life, in schools, in films, in television, on posters on every street. North Koreans are taught from birth to worship the Kim family as something close to gods. Food rations have been cut repeatedly. By 2019, rations had dropped to 300 grams per person per day, which is only half of what the United Nations recommends. In the 1990s, a famine killed an estimated 1 to 2 million people. The public distribution system that was supposed to feed the country was gutted, and the regime prioritized feeding loyal supporters first. Escapees have described walking past bodies on the street, people who had simply starved to death. The government controls every piece of information that enters the country. Accessing foreign media, including South Korean television dramas, can result in years of forced labor. One man received a 7-year sentence simply for borrowing a disc containing South Korean movies. Border guards have standing orders to shoot anyone trying to leave without permission. Surveillance has become more pervasive with advances in technology. The country remains more closed than at almost any other time in its history. North Korea is not a crisis that will resolve itself. It is a system designed to keep 25 million people trapped forever. Venezuela, a wealthy country that destroyed itself. Venezuela was once one of the wealthiest nations in South America. It had the largest oil reserves on Earth. Within 2 decades, decades of corruption, mismanagement, and political collapse turned it into one of the worst places on the planet to live. Over 20 million Venezuelans, out of a population of roughly 29 million, live in multidimensional poverty. 89% of households reported food insecurity. The official minimum wage sits at approximately $4 per month. Nearly 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country since 2014, making it one of the largest migration crises in the world. Colombians, Brazilians, and other neighboring countries have absorbed millions of Venezuelan refugees. Those who remain face shortages of food, medicine, clean water, and electricity. Blackouts have left 80% of the country without power. In the aftermath of major blackouts, doctors reported surges in waterborne diseases including diarrhea and typhoid because clean water became impossible to access. The healthcare system has collapsed in most areas outside the capital. Essential medicines are unavailable at nearly 30% of pharmacies. Armed groups known as colectivos operate with government backing in some neighborhoods, controlling access to food and functioning as enforcers of the regime. The government has responded to political opposition with mass arrests, detention, and torture. The International Criminal Court is investigating alleged crimes against humanity committed by the regime since 2014. In January 2026, the United States launched military strikes on Caracas and captured President Nicolas Maduro. The country declared a national state of emergency. Venezuela is a country that once had everything and chose to destroy it, and the people at the bottom paid the price. Over 8 million have already left. Millions more are trapped inside, unable to leave and unable to survive on what the country can offer them. South Sudan, the newest country, already broken. South Sudan only became an independent nation in 2011. Within 2 years, it was engulfed in civil war. The conflict officially ended in 2018, but the peace has never held. Ethnic tensions between the Dinka and newer communities have continued to fuel local violence across the country. 9.3 million people, 69% of the entire population, need humanitarian assistance. 7.7 million are facing high levels of food insecurity. 2.1 million children are projected to suffer acute malnutrition. 63,000 people face the worst level of food insecurity, where starvation is a daily reality. The economy is in freefall. Almost all government revenue comes from oil exports through Sudan, and the war in Sudan has shut that pipeline down. The government has been unable to pay its own workers. Civil servants have gone unpaid for nearly a year. Food prices jumped over 95% in a single year. Hyperinflation has wiped out savings overnight. Over 1.2 million people have fled from Sudan into South Sudan, adding to an already catastrophic refugee crisis and putting pressure on land, water, and food that the country simply does not have. Flooding has displaced over 76,000 people and destroyed crops and livestock across the country. South Sudan is the second most vulnerable country in the world to climate risks, and it has almost no infrastructure to cope with any of it. Somalia, decades of chaos and no functioning state. Somalia has not had a functioning central government since 1991. Over 30 years of instability, conflict, and famine have left the country in a permanent state of collapse. The militant group Al-Shabaab controls large parts of the countryside and carries out suicide bombings and attacks in the capital, Mogadishu. The group collects taxes from businesses, controls movement through checkpoints, and executes anyone it considers to be working against its interests. Piracy off the coast remains a serious threat. Over 4.6 million people, a quarter of the population, are being impacted by drought. Somalia cycles through drought and famine repeatedly. When the rains fail, crops die, livestock die, and communities are forced to move. Displacement camps fill up with people who have lost everything. In some years, entire regions go months without rain, and the animals that families depend on for their income and their food simply die. Food insecurity is chronic and worsens every time the rains fail. The healthcare system barely exists outside of major towns. Education is inconsistent and dangerous in many areas. Women face extreme restrictions on movement and access to services under areas controlled by Al-Shabaab. The international community has poured billions into Somalia over 3 decades with limited results. Peacekeeping missions, aid programs, and military interventions have all failed to produce lasting stability. The country remains one of the most dangerous places on Earth for aid workers, journalists, and civilians alike. Myanmar. Military rule and a country at war with itself. Myanmar has been under military control since a coup in February 2021 that overthrew the elected government. Since then, the country has descended into one of the worst humanitarian disasters in Asia. The military, known as the junta, has killed thousands of civilians and displaced millions. The junta has used airstrikes, artillery, and ground forces against both resistance fighters and the civilian populations that support them. Entire villages have been bombed. Resistance forces have pushed back, and in many parts of the country, they have made significant territorial gains, turning large parts of Myanmar into active war zones where civilians are caught in the middle. The ethnic minorities along Myanmar's borders, who have been fighting for autonomy for decades, have joined the resistance, making the conflict even more widespread. In March 2025, a devastating earthquake struck near Mandalay, killing hundreds and destroying entire villages that were already struggling to survive under military occupation. Over 18 million people need humanitarian assistance. Food insecurity is widespread. The healthcare system has collapsed in conflict-affected areas. Schools have closed across the country. The junta has cut off aid access to large parts of Myanmar, deliberately starving communities into submission. International sanctions have had limited effect because the military has found ways to fund itself through arms deals and natural resource exports. The people of Myanmar are caught between a brutal military government and a resistance movement, with civilians paying the price on both sides. Congo, the deadliest conflict most people have never heard of. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been at war in various forms for nearly 3 decades. The eastern part of the country, particularly the provinces of North Kivu and South Kivu, has been a battlefield for armed militias, foreign-backed rebel groups, and the Congolese army. Millions have been killed. The conflict in the Congo has caused more deaths than almost any other war since World War II. An estimated 200 armed groups operate in eastern Congo. They fight over minerals including cobalt, gold, tin, and tungsten, many of which end up in the electronics people around the world use every day. The cobalt in your smartphone battery, the tin in your computer circuits. These materials are extracted in regions where armed groups control the mines and force civilians to work under brutal conditions. Some of these mines are operated by children. Sexual violence is used as a weapon of war on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. Millions of people have been displaced. Access to healthcare and education is almost non-existent in the conflict zones. The international community has deployed peacekeepers for over 2 decades with minimal impact. The Congo is one of the richest countries on Earth in terms of natural resources and one of the poorest in terms of human well-being. The minerals in your phone may have been pulled from the ground by people living in one of the worst conditions on the planet. And the world keeps buying the electronics without asking where the materials came from or what it cost the people who dug them out of the earth. Why most people have never heard of this. The worst places on Earth to live do not make headlines the way other stories do. A celebrity scandal, a stock market crash, a political argument in Washington or London. These things dominate the news cycle. Meanwhile, tens of millions of people are starving, being shot, being forcibly displaced, and dying from diseases that could be prevented with basic medicine. The reason most people do not know the scale of what is happening in Haiti, Yemen, Sudan, North Korea, Venezuela, South Sudan, Somalia, Myanmar, and the Congo is because the media does not cover it. Not consistently. Not with the urgency it deserves. There is no clean narrative, no single villain to point at, no simple solution that can be packaged into a headline. These crises are messy, political, and expensive to fix, so the world looks away. In 2025, over 300 million people worldwide required urgent humanitarian assistance. That number is rising every year. The countries on this list account for tens of millions of those people. None of them are getting the attention they deserve. The funding gaps alone are staggering. Yemen's response plan was 5% funded. Haiti's was less than 25%. These are not situations where the world tried and failed. In most cases, the world did not even try hard enough. These are not ancient history. These are situations happening right now, today, in 2025 and into 2026. The people living in these places did not choose this. They were born into it, or it was done to them by governments, armed groups, or the failure of the international community to act. The minerals in your phone were likely pulled from conflict zones. The food on your plate exists because you live in a country where food exists. The least anyone can do is know that it is happening. And knowing is the first step toward anything changing at all. Subscribe now. If you made it this far, you already know this channel delivers straight facts. Hit subscribe, you will not regret it.